we're going to continue looking at aspects of running a successful website that aren't directly related to software development. In the last lecture, we looked at site administration and maintenance, and we learned about the different parts of a web server and how to set them up and keep them running. Today we're going to talk about the business side of running a website, and we're going to talk about how to make money from an e-commerce platform. So making money on the web. It's really important, if you want to have a successful e-commerce site, that you have a strategy for monetizing your site. And there's different models that work well. These are some of them. Obviously, if you have a product that you can sell, that's a great way to make money. You can make money directly by selling your product or service. So that's the model that's used by Amazon, eBay, Walmart.com, Etsy. Maybe less obviously, a lot of online game sites, because they can sell you in-game currency and other kinds of things to make some money. Another model is the subscription model. Pandora, for example, uses a subscription model. Sometimes you have to pay even to use the service. For example, you can't watch Netflix without a subscription. But often there's some sort of free tier that you can subscribe to and that's subsidized in some other way. And then they make their money by selling premium service. So you can buy a premium account and get certain features that are missing from the free version. Some websites use a donation model or a grant-based model. So Wikipedia, for example, I think gets some funding from different government offices, perhaps the Library of Congress, not really sure. But they also accept donations. Now, Wikipedia obviously is a nonprofit organization. They're not trying to make a profit, but this is how they pay the bills and keep the servers running. And finally, probably the most common model on the internet is the affiliate marketing model, which we call advertising. So let's talk a little bit about how that works. In order to understand affiliate marketing, you need to understand some terms. Now, first of all, let me give you a disclaimer. I am a computer scientist. I'm a programmer. I am not an expert in business or in marketing. But fortunately, I have access to some great resources. And one of the resources that I've tapped extensively for this lecture is Dr. Carpenter, who you will meet in the next segment of the course. I think he's going to teach cybersecurity for you next semester. But he has a wealth of knowledge in this area, and he's provided me with a lot of great resources. So thank you to Dr. Carpenter. First of all, we need to define something called an impression. What's an impression? Well, that's just one view of an advertisement on a web page. And so every time a new user pulls up a web page and sees an advertisement, that's one impression. So if I view the same web page 10 times and it has the same ad, that ad has 10 impressions. Some advertising models are based on impressions, so I might be charging a company every time there's an impression of their ad, and that's called pay per impression. That's not very common anymore because most impressions don't result in sales directly. Instead, we look at something called a click-through, and a click-through is the process of clicking on an advertisement on a web page, but the click itself isn't enough because I might click and then I might go back before I even see the page. So a click-through is the process that starts with clicking on the advertisement but ends with the page loading. So if there's some error and it doesn't go through, that doesn't count. But if I click and the advertiser's page successfully loads, that's considered a click-through. Pay-per-click is a model based on click-throughs. So the idea is that the number of click-throughs that an ad receives determines how much compensation I get for hosting that ad on my website. If we want to understand how successful a pay-per-click-through model is, or a pay-per-click model is, we look at the click-through rate, which is the number of click-throughs per some number of impressions. So maybe it's the number of click-throughs per 100 impressions, like I've defined it here. And you usually express that as a percentage. So a 50% click-through rate would mean that half of the time that people visited my web page, they clicked on the ad. 50% is not very likely. Click-through rates more around 2 to 5%, probably much more likely. There's also something called a traffic exchange. These are legal, but whether they're ethical, I'm going to leave up to you. These make me nervous. The idea is really simple. It's a website or some other organization where website owners agree to visit each other's sites to drive up traffic. So this makes them look good to advertisers because they're getting all this traffic, but it's sort of artificial traffic. They're just sort of scratching each other's back to make the numbers look good. A particularly interesting form of that is called auto surfing. This is where they actually use scripts to automate traffic exchange. So I have a script that will visit your page 10 times if you will run your script and visit my page 10 times. And usually there's some sort of credit that you bank up. Every time you visit someone's page, you get credit, and you can use that credit to have them visit your page, and so on and so forth. It's interesting. Another model is called pay per lead. So instead of paying per impression or per click, I can pay per lead. What is a lead? Well, a lead means that not only did the user click on the advertisement, but they actually took some sort of action on the other side. They signed up for a mailing list, or they created an account. They didn't necessarily buy anything, but they've given some sort of information to the advertiser that will allow them to follow up and possibly generate a sale. And of course, pay per sale means that I get some sort of commission for each sale that you make by advertising on my website. Another option is called in-text advertising. I think I've seen this primarily on like news web pages. The idea is that the advertiser can take some of the content of your site and add a hyperlink from that content to their page. So you pull up a news article and it happens to mention dog houses. Well, the advertiser is someone who sells dog houses, and every time the word dog house occurs in the article, they put a link from that word to their site. So when a reader clicks on dog house, instead of getting more information about dog houses, they get a link to the site that sells them. Of course, if you want any of these models to work, you have to get traffic to your site. And there's different marketing channels that you might use. So the most obvious is called organic search. The idea is that you list your page in a search engine. So you can actually register a website with Google and put in certain keywords that it should use to index your site. And Google will send a bot to go scrape your page and use its algorithm to decide whether or not those keywords actually match your page. And if they do, when someone searches for those keywords in Google, your site may come up in the list of search results. An alternative to this is to use paid search. And this is the same idea, except that I can actually give the search engine money to make my link more attractive. Maybe that's by ranking it higher in the search results, or maybe it's by putting it in a bold font or a slightly larger font so that it's more likely that someone will see it and click on it. Another way to generate traffic to your site is through referrals, word of mouth, or maybe by having people post links to you, tweet about your company, post things on Instagram and Facebook. There's a lot of different ways to incentivize this. You can have contests. You can offer some sort of reward or prize for a number of referrals, but that's a way to generate traffic. You can launch an email campaign and send spam to everybody advertising your product. The Russian mafia loves to send spam for products that aren't legal over here, and they make a lot of money that way. Social media advertising, you can pay Facebook to put your ad over in the sidebar or to embed it into people's feeds, which a lot of people find annoying, but is still an effective marketing tool. And finally, of course, you can use traditional forms of advertising such as television and radio. Now, how do we know if our marketing campaign is successful or not? Well, we're going to use something called the conversion rate. So the conversion rate is the number of visitors to a site that become buyers. So if I'm advertising your product and I'm generating lots of sales, I'm going to have a high conversion rate. On the other hand, if you're getting some clicks but you're not seeing very many buyers, then you're going to have a low conversion rate. If we want to maximize the conversion rate, we have to look at something called the conversion funnel. This is the path that a potential customer takes through the website to the completion of a purchase. So first of all, they visit my page. Maybe they look up some information on a product, and then maybe they contact me with, send me an email to ask questions about the product, and then I reply, and they come back to the website, and they look up more information, and eventually they add it to the shopping cart, and they click submit, and the sale is made. I want that conversion funnel that draws people into the shopping cart and gets them to actually buy something. I want that to be as simple and straightforward as possible. I want it to be very easy for people to find the information that they want and then be able to make the purchase. So we want to focus on that when we're optimizing our website. If that's not successful, if the conversion funnel is ineffective, then we see what's called abandonment. Abandonment means leaving a website before you've completed a purchase. So you come, you look around for a while, you can't find what you want, or you don't like the information that you find, or the website's just too awkward to use. and you leave, that's abandonment. We want to avoid abandonment. So the higher the conversion rate, the more profit that you make. We want to keep the conversion funnel short and simple to reduce the amount of abandonment. Of course, conversion rate is only one measure of success. Another measure of success is the profit margin. And that's the amount of profit that we make after we deduct the costs. So if I can sell a product for $10, but it only costs me $8 to make, and maybe $1 to run the website and advertise it, then I've made $1 of profit. So my margin would be $1. So profit is an important measure. It's largely determined by two things, upselling and cross-selling. Upselling means that a customer buys a more expensive product than the one that they first considered. So for example, if I'm a car salesman and someone comes into the shop and they are looking at Buicks and I get them to instead buy a Mercedes, that's an example of upselling. Okay, cross-selling means that a customer comes in to buy one product and they leave with another product. So I go to Amazon and I want to buy a transistor radio. And I buy my radio, but I also buy a warranty to go with that radio. Or maybe I buy an antenna to go with that radio. That's an example of cross-selling. So I'm selling multiple products, even though the original purpose of the visit to the website was to buy one. So the fact that we have different measures of success leads to an interesting paradox, and I'm grateful to Dr. Carpenter for sharing this with me. It's called the free shipping paradox, and the question is, should you offer free shipping for your product? On the one hand, if you offer free shipping, you're going to have more sales. More people are going to be willing to buy online from you because they don't have to pay for the shipping. On the other hand, shipping is expensive, and so this is going to increase your costs and reduce your profit margin. So there's some threshold at which it becomes worth your while to offer free shipping. It probably isn't worth it if you're just selling one item that has a very small profit margin for you already. But if you're going to sell a large number of items, or if you're going to sell an item that's very expensive and has a large amount of profit attached to it, then maybe it's worth your while. And sometimes products in different categories have different profit margins and different costs, so you might have more wiggle room in some areas than others. So if you offer, say, a flat threshold where you say any purchase above $50 gets free shipping, you're going to make money some of the time, but you're also going to lose money sometimes. Because if people are buying a bunch of cheap things that are expensive to ship, you're going to lose money. But if they're buying a bunch of gift cards that hardly cost anything to ship but have large profit margins, then you're going to make quite a bit of money. So if we want to evaluate the success of our strategy, we can look at what are called website analytics. And these usually come from either your server logs or from cookies and other means of tracking web behavior. So you can look at your log files, and I think we talked about how to do that in the last lecture, and you can count unique visitors or impressions. You can also use tools like Google Analytics that will tell you a lot more information. They'll tell you not only who is visiting your website, but where they're from, what country they're from, what browser they were using, what other sites they visit, how long they spent on your website. There's a lot of information that Google Analytics can provide. And then you can perform some sort of statistical analysis on it that might inform how you should modify your web page in order to generate more traffic, or what kinds of products that you should make available to generate more profit. So this is a really important tool. Now, having a marketing strategy is really important, but there are also other business considerations that we need to take into consideration when we're designing a profitable and successful e-commerce site. One thing that we need to think about is, how can a non-technical user, like a business manager, update the site? If you're writing a website for, say, a used car dealership, the salesman isn't going to know how to write something in HTML and CSS. They need to be able to add content to the site quickly and easily. If a new car comes in, they need to be able to put pictures of that car up on the website and list all of the things about that car, all the features, quickly and easily without having to do any coding. The second thing we have to keep in mind is, how can I target the content of the web page to the correct market? And so we have to think a little bit more about who are we selling to and what do they look for in a web page. And finally, we have to think about the legal and social environment. So let's talk a little bit about editing a website. So in this class, I've taught you how to use HTML and CSS and Python and JavaScript and AJAX and SQL and jQuery and XML and JSON to design an interactive website. Now those are awesome tools. It's really important that you understand how they work if you're going to design a website. But very few successful websites are written from scratch using those languages. We do that in this class because I want you to really learn how they work. But in practice, we don't do that. Instead, we provide a way that users can upload and download content without knowing any of those technical skills. Now, it occurred to me earlier that I never defined the terms upload and download. I just sort of assumed that you knew what they meant. But because it's important to be precise, I'm going to define them here. An upload means that we're sending a file or other information from the web browser to the server. So if I'm uploading something, it's going from the browser to the server. A download means that I'm retrieving information from the server to my computer, to my web browser. So information goes from the server to the web browser when we're downloading. It goes from the browser to the server when we're uploading. So if I am a non-technical user, like a car salesman, how am I going to be able to add content to the website? Well, one solution is to use what's called a WYSIWYG editor. WYSIWYG, which is an acronym, WYSIWYG, stands for What You See is What You Get. And it comes from, I think, a 70s TV show or something like that, which made it popular. But it was really adopted in the 80s in the area of desktop publishing. So WYSIWYG editors are sort of the first graphical word processors. And typically, while they claim that what you see is what you see isn't what you get because what's on the screen and what you print are formatted completely differently. But they sort of capture an ideal that you can actually see what your web page, for example, is going to look like as you edit it. Now, there are a whole bunch of different programs that allow a user to edit a web page in this way. So, for example, ColdFusion and Adobe Dreamweaver are editors that provide WYSIWYG editing capabilities. There's a downside to these. They usually produce very, very bad code. So if you produce a web page in one of these WYSIWYG editors and put it up on the website, it may look nice to a user, but if you have to actually edit the HTML or the CSS to modify it in some way, it's very difficult because you get lots of extra tags you don't need. Often the attributes are named very poorly. It makes it really hard to work with. It's also usually pretty difficult to integrate these with databases and other APIs. Dreamweaver has a lot of plugins and modules that allow you to do things like shopping carts, but they're really hard to customize because they're really not designed to be used outside of the editor. So in practice, most sites use a different approach. They use something called a CMS, or Content Management System. So there's lots of different examples of this. Probably the most popular right now is WordPress, which started as blogging software and then grew into a full-blown CMS. Joomla is a PHP-based content management system that's very popular. Drupal, DNN, and Django are also popular content management systems that use different languages. Usually a content management system has two parts. It has a back end that's written in some sort of programming language like Python, and then it has a front end that's written in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all the technologies that we've talked about in this class. But the nice thing about this is that you don't have to understand those languages in order to use the product. Instead, they're going to provide features that any kind of user can use, whether they're technically trained or not. And because they're widely deployed, they've also been heavily tested. So you can focus on the content that you want to host on your website rather than how that's implemented. CMSs also usually have an API that allows you to interface with databases and other third-party sites, Google Maps, Facebook, and other social media. You can integrate lots of things in through the use of plugins to WordPress or to Joomla and so forth. However, they can be a little bit harder to customize than a custom-built website like we've been making in this class. You have to learn the API for that particular content management system in order to be able to do these things. So what do they allow you to do? Well, they allow a non-technical user, a site manager, to create posts or pages. So I get a new car into my dealership, I can put up a page that has all the details about that car. You can moderate comment threads, so you can have interactive discussions on a CMS. You can usually upload media, pictures, images, sound, all sorts of different things, and you can organize them on the page so that they look nice. You can also provide contact information. So if I put my phone number up, but then I get fired and somebody else comes along, I can easily update the contact information without having to edit the HTML. And finally, you can customize the look and feel of the site. And there is a thriving business in selling templates for WordPress and Joomla. So what is a template? Well, it's just a prearranged web page design that includes text and images, images for things like navigation and separators on the page. And they're used to create other websites. So if I just install a template, it has some sort of default text, like maybe lorem ipsum, which is just some meaningless Latin words, lorem ipsum dolor, I forget the rest of it, that are used as a placeholder. But they're going to have that meaningless text on the page arranged in a way that looks nice, and they'll have a navigation bar and maybe a logo and those kinds of things that you can then customize with your own content to make a site that looks nice. So the templates are usually distributed as a package that includes HTML and CSS files and possibly some PHP or JavaScript or something that makes them more interactive. And you can get some of those for free, but the best ones you usually have to pay for. A commercial template ranges in price anywhere from $50, $300, $1,000 for a really good one. So if you expect to make money off your site, it's worth investing a little bit of money in a good template that has been well tested and that looks nice. If you're just throwing up something for, say, a nonprofit organization that can't afford something, you can find some really cheap $50 ones that will do the trick. Another thing we need to think about when we're designing a successful web business is how do we know what our market is? And this is part of doing a successful needs analysis. You may remember that earlier in the semester we talked about the software development life cycle, and we said it starts with requirements analysis or needs analysis, and then we do design, implementation, testing, and maintenance. So one of the things that we should ask when we're doing needs analysis is, what is the nature of our business? And there's really two different broad classifications of an online business that most websites fall into. They're usually either B2B, which stands for business to business sites, or they're B2C, business to consumer sites. A B2B site means that we're selling a product to other businesses or providing a service possibly to other businesses. So for example, if I'm a wholesaler and you're a retailer, I might have products that I want you to sell. So I'm going to have a web page that allows you to order large numbers of this item, and then you can sell it in your store. Or maybe you're producing some sort of product and I can sell parts to you for use in that product. Or maybe you need some sort of service, legal services, or auditing, or marketing, maybe even some sort of consulting on your web page. If I'm selling a service, then that's business to business, because I'm providing it to other businesses. It turns out, in my limited research, which I am not an expert in this area, it turns out that there are a lot more B2B transactions than you would expect. Every time that there's a B2C transaction where a consumer buys a product, there's a whole bunch of behind-the-scenes transactions between businesses that make that sale happen. So B2B is actually a really important sector of the industry. Business to consumer, again, I'm selling directly to you. So this is Amazon, eBay, Etsy, and so forth. Second thing that we should do is research the marketplace. Who is our market? Who is going to be buying our product? But also, who are our competitors and what are they doing? What do their sites look like? What features do their sites provide? Maybe we want to provide the same features. Maybe we don't. And finally, you should always get details about previous marketing attempts so you don't repeat the mistakes of the past and so that you can steal successful ideas and reuse them. Finally, if the site's an international site, you need to carefully research cultural differences. Let's talk about this a little bit. There's some famous marketing mistakes with respect to international marketing. So if you're going to be selling outside of the US, you need to think about these things. Here's an example. There's an Italian company that sells mineral water called Trafficante. They expanded their business to South America. When they did that, they just kept the same name. It says on the bottle, Traficante Mineral Water. Well, Traficante in Spanish means drug dealer. So they were selling drug dealer mineral water. I don't think that was quite the market they were after. Another example of a mistake in this area is a British shoe company called Umbro wanted to sell shoes in Germany, and so they named their shoe the Zyklon, which is the German word for cyclone. Unfortunately, Zyklon also has a different meaning in German. It's the name of a pesticide that was used by the Nazis to execute Jews in the gas chambers. It was actually one of the gases that was used at the concentration camps. So marketing shoes as Zyklon shoes didn't go over so well. There's a wonderful website, and the link is at the bottom here. Actually, I guess it's there's an article on LinkedIn that you can search for. You can search for Top 63 International Marketing Mistakes and Pitfalls. And one of the stories that's on that site is a story about a company called Parker Pens. And Parker had a wonderful slogan for their pen: "It won't leak in your pocket and embarrass you." Unfortunately, when they translated that slogan into Spanish, they used the verb embarazar for it to embarrass. And embarazar actually doesn't mean to embarrass in Spanish, it means to impregnate. It didn't send quite the message that they wanted. Something else we need to consider when we're developing an online business is intellectual property. This is important really for two reasons. First of all, it's really important that we don't get sued. So we have to be careful not to violate the intellectual property rights of other organizations. But also, we want to be able to protect our assets. So a second reason is so that we can register our trademarks and our copyrights and patents and protect our own ideas, our own business from being stolen by other people. So what are some of the protections that we provide for intellectual property rights? Well, first of all, there's copyright. And copyright is just a set of rights that are held by the author of a creative work. And there's different rights that are involved in copyright. It's not just one right. Some of the most important ones are the ability to distribute a work, to publish a work, to perform a work, to record it or make copies of it, and to create derived works. So if you own the copyright on something, you can decide who can do those things and when they can do them. Now, if you want to use copyrighted work, sometimes you can. If the owner of the copyright grants you a license, then you can use that work under the terms of that license. And the license only allows restricted use. So you can only use them in a particular way for a particular amount of time, and usually only for a particular fee, right? You pay a certain amount of money for the right to use that copyrighted work. That's not always the case. There's also what's called copyleft, which is a form of copyright that allows free use, but and most open source software is copylefted. But usually, when you're using someone else's work, you need to pay a licensing fee. Now, there are certain exceptions to that. You can use copyrighted work without a license when you're using it under fair use. Now, what is fair use? Well, the courts have set aside specific ways that you can use a work that doesn't violate copyright. And when they're deciding whether something is fair use or not, they take into consideration really 4 different areas. First of all, they look at the purpose and character of the use. So for example, if I'm teaching about something in my class, I can use copyrighted material for free in my class without obtaining a license because it's for educational use. So not all educational and journalistic uses are protected as fair use, but many of them are. It's much more likely that something is going to be fair use if it's for an educational purpose or if I'm reporting on it. It's also protected fair use typically to parody something. So if I'm doing satire or making fun of it, copyright doesn't usually apply in that case. Sometimes it does, but usually not. And also, it's more likely to be fair use if it's for a non-profit use than if I'm making money off it in some way. They also look at the nature of the copyrighted work. So for example, fiction is usually copyrighted, and using fiction is less likely to be fair use than if I'm citing nonfiction, for example. So if I'm citing from a scholarly article, that's much more likely to be considered fair use than if I am covering a song by some other band. The amount and substantiality of the use is considered. So small quotes are much more likely to be considered fair use than if I'm just copying something verbatim and publishing the whole thing again. And finally, the effect on a work's value. So there's a famous case, I want to say it's Ariba versus Kelly. I don't remember for sure. But essentially there was a photographer, I think a wedding photographer, and he was taking pictures and putting them up on his website. And he made his money by selling these pictures. So you would visit his website, and if you liked one of his pictures, you could download it, you could pay some money and download a copy of the picture. Well, a search engine, I think Ariba was the name of the search engine, but the search engine was visiting websites, and it was creating thumbnails to put up on the pages. So if you found a web page in the search results, it would show you a little tiny picture that was taken from that page. Well, the photographer claimed that the search engine was violating his copyright because they were copying those pictures that he was selling without his permission, without paying a licensing fee. But the courts ruled that it was an example of fair use and that the search engine was not violating his copyright because indexing his page in a search engine actually helped him make money. It didn't hurt him. By making his page more popular and easy to find, they were actually adding value to his work rather than taking away from it, and so that was considered a fair use. So the effect on the work's value is considered and whether something's fair use. Another way to protect intellectual property is through the use of a trademark. Copyright expires after a period of time. It used to be originally about 28 years. By the way, copyright is actually in the US Constitution, but back then it was only for a 28-year period. Now it's at least 95 years. It's, I think, 95 years from the death of the author, except for for hire work, which I think has a period of 120 years from the date of publication. At any rate, copyright expires after a certain period of time. Trademark doesn't really. The idea behind trademark is to prevent fraud. So if I have a product and I want to market it, I don't want other companies imitating me and making people buy a product that they think is mine but isn't really mine. And so I can trademark a brand name or a logo or some sort of symbol that uniquely identifies my product. So trademark gives you both the right to use the symbol and the right to keep other people from using that same symbol. There have been a lot of interesting lawsuits about this. McDonald's at one point tried to trademark the letter M, and while they weren't able to successfully trademark the letter M, they were able to successfully trademark the golden arches. So if you draw an M that looks too much like the golden arches, you could be violating McDonald's trademark. However, you can use the letter M without paying a royalty to McDonald's. Another option is to get a patent. Patents give you an exclusive right to make, use, or sell a product for a fixed amount of time. Usually that time is a period of 7 years, renewable to 14, although I think it may have changed recently. The purpose behind trademarks is to encourage companies to share their trade secrets. So if I come up with a new drug or a new formula for building something, I could just keep that secret to myself and hope that nobody else figures out how to do it and make a lot of money. And if I'm successful at hiding that information and keeping it secret, then I can make money for as long as I want and nobody else can compete with me in the market because I have a monopoly on that information. However, if I do that, I risk somebody else discovering my secret, and if they discover it, then they can start making money off of it too. So what patent does is it encourages me to actually publish the details of my formula. This brings costs down in the long run because lots of companies will have access to that information. They can all use that information to compete in the market space. Instead of just having one drug, we can have a whole bunch of generics that compete. But for a limited amount of time, I've published that information, but nobody else is allowed to use it while the patent exists. So for 7 or maybe 14 years, I have exclusive rights to sell that product. So this protects me from the secret getting out, but at the end of the 14 years, I've published the information so nobody else, or everybody else can use it. Patents can actually be sub-licensed. If I discover some great formula for some chemical or something like that, I can actually sort of sell the right to use my patent to someone, and some other company can actually manufacture it. And patents can include things like software and website designs, even web applications. So you need to be careful not to steal somebody else's patented design without checking on whether you're allowed to use it or not, getting a license for it. Patents are often abused. There are companies called patent trolls that don't actually make any sort of product. What they do is they buy up patents from other companies and then try to use them to sue other companies. And they sort of blackmail businesses into paying them off. I don't want to deal with this big lawsuit for using a shopping cart on my website. And since online shopping carts are patented, I can't just use one without paying a licensing fee to this company. So this is actually something that really happened. There's a company called Sovereign Software, and they bought a company that had a patent for an online shopping cart, and they sued Newegg and Amazon and about 50 other businesses, claiming that they were using an online shopping cart without paying for a license to use it. And they actually won $40 million from Amazon. This was in the early days of the internet. I want to say maybe 2005 or 2007. They won this lawsuit. But that settlement was actually eventually overturned because there was something that existed before their patent called CompuServe Mall. And once the courts discovered that there was prior work in that area, the appeals court overturned the decision. So you can use a shopping cart without paying for a patent from Sovereign Software. But for a while, it looked like every online business was going to have to pay some sort of royalty to use online shopping carts. You can read more about that at this link at the bottom of the slide. So in summary, when you're creating an e-commerce website, it's important to keep in mind the type of business that it is, whether it's B2B or B2C, and design the website appropriately for that market. Websites can make money in several different ways. You can do it through sales or subscriptions or affiliate marketing, and there's several different ways to do affiliate marketing. You can do pay per impression, pay per click, pay per lead, or pay per sale. It's important to keep cultural differences in mind when designing a website. It's also important to consider copyright, trademark, and patents, and other kinds of legal and social environmental issues. And finally, a content management system can be a great way to allow non-technical users to add content and edit content on a website. Hope you're enjoying the class. We're almost done. I'll see you next time.